I had grown to despise the rock I had been hiding under. Social fumbling, reservation, and subpar fashion had all been firmly ingrained in my upbringing. Because of this, I've always been confused, albeit fascinated by what other people view as normal. But I still choose to live my life around it. My day to day decisions are highly influenced by what other people would do, what others would like, and as a product of that, I become invested in topics that are conventional. My life is contorted so that anything in my control falls within the status quo. But I am constantly forced to live with circumstances that are out of my control. I do want to embrace my differences, but I always resort to hiding these parts of me in favor of elements that are not unique. I do have wants and interests that are just like everyone else, but that is about all I am willing to confide in with my peers. The truth is, I was never able to fully acknowledge my insecurities. That is, until I learned about Pedro. Born in 16th century France, Pedro was a boy with wants and interests no different than yours or mine. And just like it does for you and me, perception stood as a massive obstacle in the way of living a happy and fulfilling life. Pedro was born with hypertrichosis, a medical condition causing abnormal hair growth all over the body. Pedro was a boy who fulfilled the perception of ordinary in every category, except for physical appearance. Unfortunately, not a lot of information on Pedro exists due to him not being valued as a normal human, but the information that does exist suggests a overwhelming pattern of struggling with being accepted. Our story starts in 1547, when King Henry II of France received Pedro as a gift. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as gifts were usually wild animals of some sort, but what differentiated this boy was that no one really knew what he was. French folklore at the time led people to believe he could have been a wild man, an evil mythical creature with killer instinct and motives to steal and eat children. Because of this, the French guards expected very aggressive behavior from the boy and were ultimately confused by his behavior, as he did not seem to want to steal or eat any children. He was actually very calm with very human-like traits. It even appeared that he could speak because he was able to utter his name, Pedro. And when King Henry received word of the wild man's humanity, instead of continuing to keep the boy caged, he decided to attempt to give Pedro as normal of a life as possible. And to his credit, they tried. They clothed him, bathed him, educated him. They even changed his name from Pedro to Petrus. The royals really did try to give him a normal life, but it was all under the guise of an experiment instead of genuine compassion. Fortunately, he did experience some success ingratiating himself with the public because of his newfound royal status. He was now no longer the scary wild man, but instead the royal scary wild man. He became the subject of many famous paintings and was dubbed the Man of the Woods by philosopher Ulysses Aldrovandi. And, fortunately, while initially ostracized, his state of loneliness would soon change when a woman by the name of Catherine de' Medici rose to power. De' Medici's reign marked a very significant change in leadership with a much more forceful approach than Henry II, and one of her main focuses was continuing Petrus's legacy with a famous family of hairy sons and daughters. But in order to create a family, Petrus had to find a bride, which remained troublesome until de' Medici stepped in herself. In the hopes of breeding more wild men, Petrus's bride, also named Catherine, was forced upon him, and to speed up the process of reproduction even further, the wedding was held on the very same day that they met. It was a story of conditional love, and both parties were very hesitant, but reluctantly agreed. Catherine, much like the guards, was initially terrified, but eventually grew to see less of the wild man and more of the humanity of Petrus in her eyes, accomplishing the seemingly impossible task of shifting perception with an honest and personal relationship. Petrus and Catherine went on to have 7 kids, 4 of whom developed hypertrichosis, and unfortunately, without the appearance of most couples, They were not able to receive the same rights, and all four hairy children were given away as gifts. But despite the lack of freedom, Petrus and Catherine were eventually able to escape from the attention. They found peace and quiet at Lake Bolsena in Italy until Petrus's death in 1618 at the age of 80. Petrus and Catherine's legacy does live on in the National Gallery of Art. They are classified as insects, but they are still included in the gallery. But perhaps most famously, Petrus was the inspiration for the iconic fairy tale Beauty and the Beast, a story that preaches valuing beauty that isn't just superficial, a story that the 16th century had never heard of. Although Beauty and the Beast is meant to teach children about acceptance and appreciation for character and not just appearance, many of us have stopped reflecting on the morals from these childhood fairy tales as we've grown older. And although comparing the prejudices of the 1500s to today might seem a little trivial, a lot of the primal instincts present in the 16th century are a murky reflection of the perceived negativity surrounding abnormality today. While researching for this event, I initially found it very easy to connect my own experiences to Petrus's. We are not the same person. I can't even grow facial hair, and my problems exist on a much smaller scale. But it is important to know that social barriers will exist on many different shapes and sizes. There are many stubborn people out there, but there are just as many people willing to accept differences who ultimately just want to make a connection. It's unrealistic to assume that Pedro's story can change the world into a completely accepting space, or that conformity will cease to exist in society. But what his journey does tell us is that if we actively take steps to respect, engage with, and humanize the wild men of the world, those who feel like outliers in schools and communities and society can feel a whole lot less wild. Thank you.